Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another wonderful, beautiful morning here in Texas. It is Wednesday. It is Fast Tracks Live night. Tonight we will be going over 2 or 3 of the toughest questions in Unit 10. So if you're going through the Fast Tracks program, there are, without a doubt, 3 questions that are in Unit 10 which really seem to give people a hard time. So we're going to go over that tonight. So hopefully if you're a Fast Track student, you join us. And we're more than happy to go over those. We're going to go over those questions and kind of break them down so you can see how you would address those questions, especially if it was on an electrical exam. But again, these questions in Unit 10 of the Fast Tracks program, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the budget, the plus, or the black. These same questions appear, and we just want to be able to break them down for you so you have a better understanding of them. Also, we had a person ask me, and I'm going to do a detailed response to them. I have not done it yet. They asked me to explain 310.12 a little bit when it comes to this situation. And I won't go into this podcast because I just got it this morning. I saw it popped up on the list. I got a bunch of other Let's Ask Pauls that I got to do. I'm behind on those. As y'all all know, I haven't put out podcasts like I regularly do. I do have to get caught up on those, and hopefully I will get caught up on those this week. Maybe tonight after the Fast Tracks Lives episode, I will get on some of these podcasts. But as y'all all know, I usually work till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning anyway. So, and then I'm up at 6 o'clock every day. So, I mean, yeah, sleep is for the weak. I'm just saying. But today's question came in. A guy asked, he says, I want to apply 310.12. And most of you remember that's the 83% rule. I mean, the conductors have to be at least 83% of the rating of the service or feeder application. Okay, whatever the rating is. And that's usually dictated by the overcurrent device. So he has a situation where he's bringing a service to his house. He's remodeling his house. And he wants to relocate some things. And the easiest way that I can explain to people whether you can apply 310.12 or not is the portion of it that states that you have to supply the entire load of the dwelling or loads associated by the dwelling, right? So if you don't, then you can't use the smaller conductor allowance of not having to, it can't be less than 83%. Obviously, it can be larger. You could size it based on 310.16 for ampacity if you want. But this is an allowance in 310.12, and it covers for services and feeders. So this is an allowance for you to have smaller service conductors. And, of course, in 230, it does reference the allowance to apply 310.12 as well, because typically we're going to size our conductors and protect them at their overcurrent. So this is an allowance for you to not have to have the conductors larger than 83%. Obviously, you still have to handle your load, okay? So you have to do a load calculation, so that would have been the whole basis of sizing anything to begin with. But in the case of the individual that sent me the email, it sounds to me that if you think about the panel on the other side of your dwelling, and then you have a panel on the other side of the dwelling, you certainly are not going to be able to apply 310.12 to that feeder that's going on the other side of the dwelling because it's not going to see 100% of the entire dwelling. Now, that kind of doesn't make sense to a lot of people because they're like, well, dude, if you're taking off some of those loads, it should be better that feeder's not seeing everything. But that's just not how it works. That's not how the code works. That feeder, you're going to have to size to the load. You're going to have to use 310.16. You have to do all of that in order to, of course, with the feeder, you get the allowance to use 240.4b next size up rule for the feeder application. You get to apply. You get a lot of the things in the code that will allow you to do that. But when it comes to 310.12 and the 83%, just remember, it can't be less than 83%. It could be larger than 83%, but it can't be less than 83%. So even after you do some adjustment and corrections, if that's what you're doing, whether you're running those feeders through thermal insulation, whether it's ambient temperature, and you're applying 310.15b or c, Just remember that you do have, allowances in the code to use a higher temperature rating of the conductor, to do an adjustment or correction. At the end of the day, when it comes to the ability to apply 310.12, it can't be less than 83%. Okay, so even if you're using the 90 for adjustment and corrective purposes, and you adjust it or correct it based on your condition of use, it still can't be less than 83% if 310.12 is being applied. Okay. Also, a lot of people think of that as an exception. It's not an exception, it's a rule. So people ask, when do you apply 310.12? When are you able to apply it? And the rule is you can apply it anytime, as long as the conditions are in play. Right? So if you could go to 310.12 and you read all the conditions, 12240, or individual dwelling units where it would be applicable under the feeder provision, or however you're falling under the rules of 310.12, and you're between 100 and 400 amps, and that's what you're working with, then you can apply 310.12. But you have to remember, this only applies to the conductors, because that's what this rule is about. It only applies to the conductors, that's why it's in 310, by the way, that see 100% of the load. So if I was coming from a service drop, let's say, and I was dropping down, and I was going to hit the meter, and then I'm going to come out of that and hit the emergency disconnects if it's a 1 and 2 family, right? And then I'm going to come out and hit my panels, and let's say they're all grouped and they're meeting everything in 230.70A1, everything's good. Then I would be able to apply 310.12 from the point of attachment down to the meter, right? But then the moment that it separated out, I would not be able to apply it, because those conductors are not seeing 100% of the entire load. And I know for people that look at that and they hate that, they go, well, that doesn't make sense. Because if you're taking some of the load off of it, isn't that better than trying to? No, but it's due to diversification and the diversity that's built into it. And again, I know people hate when we say this. I know I get people that do hate this because they want the code to be some kind of instruction manual for them. I say the code is what it is. You just have to follow it. It's been, vetted. People submitted it. Things have been reviewed. You just follow the code. And people hate when I say that. They're like, well, I got to know this, and I got to know that. And I get it. I hear you. And that's great passion. I get it. The reality is, the code is the code. Whether you understand it or not, that's why people will submit things to paulabernathy.com. If there's something they don't understand, I'll do my best to try to break it down for you, do the research. Again, I'm not a code historian. I don't sit here and try to begin to tell you what was in 1984 from my memory. I'm just, that's not what I do, okay? When I do expert witnesses and stuff like that, or I consult a consultant, then what I do is I if I don't know it off the top of my head, I still go and research it, that type of thing. So it's great to know code. It's wonderful. And quoting code is nice. It's a good parlor trick. When I can rattle off code sections and articles, it looks great on stage and people love it. And people go, ooh, ah. Reality is, a real good consultant will take the time and research something just to make sure that we're giving you the best advice that we can. Now, obviously, when I'm giving advice on Let's Ask Paul or things like that, the reason you go through paulabernathy.com is because of the disclaimers. But at the end of the day, I'm giving you the 30,000 foot view. Obviously, you can ask me additional questions on anything you want to deep dive. But to answer the gentleman's question before I can fully respond to his email, the whole purpose of 310.12 is to be able to give you an allowance based on diversification to size the service or feeder conductors that supply the entire load to the dwelling or the dwelling unit, or individual dwelling unit where applicable, okay? That's the whole allowance. So it can't be less than 83%. Of course, if you use 310.16 ampacity table, then it's going to be more than 83%, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, the table that was derived in 310.12, which used to be 310.15b6, and then it was b7, and then it was in the code, then it was out of the code, then it was back in Informative Annex D, I believe D7, I can't remember, but there, and then of course it got pulled out again now, and in 2020 it got put back in 310.12. That whole table is based on the 83% of the service or feeder rating, which is based on the overcurrent device. But that is without any adjustment or corrections. That's just, you can go use that table point blank if you have no adjustment or correction. I think most people, when they're dealing with services, they don't take into consideration ambient, so they really don't think about it. And there's not more than 4 current carrying conductors, so they don't, 4 or more current carrying conductors. They don't think about it. So they just go, I don't worry about it. And so they just pull from that table. I think that in a lot of places like Texas, you got to think about ambient temperatures, but nobody does. They never figure it into their services, so it is what it is. But at the end of the day, you can only use that table in 310.12 if there's no adjustment and corrections taking place. Then you can pull right from the table, and that will be based on 83%. Do the math yourself. Take any of those numbers on the left side of that column, multiply by 83%, and that's what you'll get. Then you'll go to 310.16 and see what equivalent size that would be, and you'll see where those numbers come from. So I think that's pretty straightforward. But again, that table is based on diversity, and that is that the conductors see the entire load, right? It sees the entire load of the dwelling, not partial loads. I usually give an example of this, whereas I have a house where the power comes to an overhead, comes down through the meter, then it comes to an exterior panel with the main breaker, right? Exterior panel with the main breaker, and it comes to the panel, and then, but in that panel, it branches off, and it feeds, let's say, an air conditioning unit that's sitting right there, right? But in that panel, it's basically just going from that panel. Now it's going to feed a feeder that's further into the house. Well, that feeder that's going further into the house cannot use 310.12 because it's not seeing 100% of the load of the dwelling. In that panel outside, which may be a simple 4-circuit panel or whatnot, it's dropping off to hit some, say, air conditioning units that are conveniently located. A brilliant idea, very convenient, but the feeder would not be able to use 310.12. You'd have to size it, right? Now, it never has to be larger than the service conductors anyway, so that can come into play. But at the end of the day, we're just saying you can't use 310.12 for that application, simply because the feeder is not seeing 100% of the dwelling unit. Some of it dropped off before it got to the feeder panel. You get it? So you can agree with it. You don't have to understand it, I think, in some cases, even though if you want to learn diversity and things are not on all at the same time. But you have to understand the code rules, and the rules are, if you're looking at the conductors that are in question, ask yourself this. A dwelling and all associated things from that dwelling, whether you're feeding an EV charger, whether you're feeding a detached structure, that detached structure is associated with the dwelling. It's part of the dwelling. It's being fed from the dwelling, if that's the case. So if you're looking at the conductors in question, ask yourself this important question. Are those conductors going to see the entire load potentially for the entire dwelling? If the answer is no, then you don't use 310.12. If the answer is yes, then you use 310.12 as long as you fall within the parameters, the sizing, 100 to 400, that type of thing. As long as you fall it and the voltages and everything falls within 310.12, then you can use 310.12. If they don't, then just size everything based on 310.16 and move on your way. All right? All right, hopefully you got something out of that episode. Hopefully that answered the individual's question, although I will give a detailed response. I always like to. I'll give a little more detail in my responses via email. Remember, you can submit your questions to paulabernathy.com. Anything you want, ask me, follow up. Just list the episode you're talking about and kind of give a synopsis of your question, and I will try to elaborate. I don't go back and listen to all my old podcasts. I'm sorry, I have almost 800 plus. So again, I'm not going to do that. So you need to regurgitate to me the question you're asking, and I will do my best to try to answer it for you. All right, folks, have a blessed day. It is a wonderful, glorious Wednesday. Hot as crap in Texas, 105 degrees today. Let's keep our fingers crossed the AC doesn't go out. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.